Thank you. I wish the uranium industry was as healed as I am at the moment. Just take you through Vimy today, where we're at, where we're going, but want to talk about the uranium market as well. So why Vimy, why uranium? Well, nuclear is the best source of dispatchable clean energy with the lowest CO2 emissions that there is. Supply-demand dynamics have tipped into undersupply, and through the 20s that'll continue. And the next contract cycle has started, and I'll talk about each of these points in a bit more detail. But every time that the contract cycle starts in the uranium industry, panic ensues amongst the utilities, and they just jump in all at the same time. It's like a game of musical chairs. Vimy is one of the most advanced uranium projects in the world that isn't currently in production. The WNA Fuel Report, which just came out, only lists 4 projects under development and 6 that are planned, and that includes Vimy's Mulga Rock project. So basically around the world there aren't that many new projects in the pipeline. There are some projects that have been shut down. However, when you go forward and you look at the growing demand, there aren't a lot of projects that can fill that pipeline as mines run out. We have an experienced mining team, uranium sales team, management team, and board who've put mines into production before, so it's not something that we're afraid of. We're in a first world jurisdiction. Although the state government's policy is regressive, we did get in underneath the timeline with the approvals, so we're in there. But notwithstanding that, as a mining jurisdiction, Western Australia is one of the top ones in the world, especially when you compare it to Russia, Iran, and the various stands where other parts of uranium and uranium politics are playing out. And we have a significant pipeline of projects that could provide over 30 years of supply. Just want to talk about what the conference is about. It's about clean energy. It's about the various minerals going into it. And we talk a lot about EV and lithium. So what's interesting about this is clean energy needs a clean grid. So a Volvo sedan produces about 25.5 kilograms of CO2 per 100 kilometers, which I actually don't know what that looks like, and I don't think any of us do, but apparently it's a lot. Then you've got the Tesla. Now, if you were to charge that on the grid in Queensland, you're producing 17.5 kilograms of CO2 per 100 kilometers. So, yes, it's cleaner, but it's a coal-fired car. If you were to do it in Germany, which is the poster boy for renewables, which has obviously been an abject failure, despite spending $590 billion US, that's 9 kilograms. It's cleaner. Sure, it's about a quarter, maybe a third, but still not a clean car. Then you've got South Australia, another poster boy for renewables, and that's at about 9 kilograms as well. California, who's actually shutting down their nuclear power program and replacing it with gas, which is, by the way, a fossil fuel. That's at about 7 kilograms. And then you've got Ontario. So Ontario is 1/10 of South Australia, and that's because they're nuclear. They're nuclear and hydro. Ontario is one of the cleanest emitting jurisdictions in the world for electricity. My brother actually owns a Tesla. And he actually didn't know that Ontario used nuclear power, so that's an embarrassment to our family. He's been excommunicated. He's no longer my brother, he's my cousin. But what's interesting about an average electric vehicle, just using Australian stats, would need about 3.4 megawatt hours per annum compared to a home, which is 6.4. So if we do see an electric vehicle boom, we're going to see a boom in the requirement for electricity, the requirement for metals. And I think this is something AMEC and the MCA need to pick up on, particularly in the face of the Muppet protesters that we saw in Australia's very own Venezuela, known as Victoria, during the IMARC conference. We saw a whole bunch of protesters there protesting against mining, and one thing we're not doing as miners is we're not explaining to these people, well, if you want renewable energy, we're going to need a whole lot more metal than we're currently using, because you need space, you need metal. It's a low-density power source, so we're going to need a lot more metal. So you need miners, and the miners need to get on that bandwagon. There, I've had my rant. So we're about building uranium mines. We've got 2 projects, the Mulga Rock project. The DFS came out almost 2 years ago on that project, and with the current uranium prices, we haven't been able to push it forward, but that'll change going forward. As I said, we have state and federal approvals, and we're working through the secondary permits, and provided we stay inside the confines of the project as it was described, those permits will get through. And we'd expect those to start trickling through in the next little while. Now, the government is, I would say, severely overworked and understaffed, so I think everyone's having problems with permits in terms of timelines, but we've had discussions at ministerial levels about those permits, and those secondary permits will come through. FID, or financial investment decision, to first production is about 2 years. Up in the Alligator River, that's a world-class unexplored area that we bought from Cameco. We have a project up there called Angularli, 26 million pounds at 1.3%, so there's less than 1 million tons of ore in that deposit. Same geology as the Athabasca Basin. So for those that you don't know, the Athabasca Basin is the richest endowed area in the world for uranium. It's the home of McArthur River, Cigar Lake, and several other big deposits. And the geology up there is exactly the same. So we're looking for large Tier 1 assets. So Jabiluka and Ranger exist in the Alligator River province. Board management, I'll just skip over that except to say that Scott Hyman, who's down in the lower right, third down, was here for a couple of weeks. He's a uranium marketing expert in America. He worked in the utility industry for 17 years and then with Cameco for 13 years. And after Cameco downsized their American offices, we picked him up. So he's been working in the U.S. industry for 30 years, and the U.S. is our market. That's the market we're concentrating on. It's about 28% of uranium and a low counterparty risk. So that's where we're concentrating on getting our contracts. Skip past that because it's not a very good story. So Vimy, early mover in the changing uranium market dynamics. So nuclear power is expected to grow at 2%. So when you see green rhetoric about it being a dead industry, that's a lie, which isn't surprising from greenies. There is decreasing uranium supply due to supply side reaction and unsustainably low prices. So that's caused mines to close. It's also caused one of the biggest producers of uranium, Kazatomprom, to actually behave like a Western country and start looking at value over volume. And we expect to capitalize as a first mover as one of the new producers. Electricity demand, great chart. This is a really interesting website called ourworldindata.org, which is a great one to explore for almost any data. So what this shows is this is GDP along the bottom and energy use per capita along the vertical axis, and it shows a very strong relationship, unsurprisingly, between a company's wealth and how much electricity they use. Australia is up on the top right near the United States and Canada. Qatar, oddly enough, the very top, and then Trinidad and Tobago up there because they've got an aluminum smelter. Here's China, used to be down here, it's gone past India, and here's India, hopefully about to move up the curve. So you can see that demand for electricity is going to grow. Now, the push for clean energy is also growing, and we're seeing this globally. We're seeing a lot of different groups who were ambivalent towards nuclear now coming out saying that the global targets for global warming will not be met without using nuclear, and that's the IPCC, the International Energy Agency, Bloomberg. A lot of people are kind of saying, okay, we need to look at nuclear because, as Germany clearly showed, pouring a whole bunch of money into renewables isn't going to do it. And then nuclear is the second largest source of the world's emissions-free energy after hydro. So wind and solar will catch up to nuclear probably by the 2030s or 2040s. But right now, nuclear is expected to continue to grow pretty much in lockstep with the growth of electricity. In terms of uranium fundamentals, uranium is used for nuclear power. It's 170 million pounds a year. Uranium demand is very predictable, so it's inelastic. You build a nuclear power plant of 1 gigawatt, you need 200 tons of uranium oxide a year converted into fuel. Utilities run long inventory cycles, and this is one of the issues about trying to talk to people about the uranium market, and that is that the utilities write contracts, long-term contracts, for delivery in 2 or 3 years. So this isn't a market like nickel, copper, gold, where you have an LME or you have a gold standard. This is a long-term market that's very, very opaque, and I will talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now, security always trumps price. So when you look at how much power a nuclear power plant puts out, a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant puts out 8 billion kilowatt hours a year, and the price of uranium sitting at even $50 a pound is not a big input cost to the cost of producing electricity. So they worry more about security of supply. But at times of overproduction and low prices, they will, of course, buy it at lower cost. Supply is dominated by Kazakhstan. 40% of the world's supply is coming out of Kazakhstan, who do not use it. Most of that goes to China, Russia. A bit comes into North America. Canada's second, Australia third, and then you get into Africa. On the consumption side, the USA is about 28% of the market. Then you've got France, Korea, China, and Russia. Now, our market is America. The French basically EDF, Electricity de France, have said that they only buy from producers as a risk mitigation. The US, on the other hand, the utilities will buy from new mines. They want to see diversity of supply. They spread their geographic risk. They run contracts in what are called portfolio management systems, so they have tranches of contracts, and they have space for VIMI. And we know that because we have Scott in America talking to these guys all the time. We know that there's a market in the US, and it's just a matter of the Americans starting their contracting again. They've been they've been out of the market for about 2 years because they did build up inventories, but last year there was earlier this year, there was a process going through the Commerce Department called Section 232. I won't get into too much detail, but what it did was it basically froze the American contracting market. And so there just hasn't been any activity, and that's one of the reasons that the price has gone down. Uranium is very high density, small footprint, so a pellet of uranium is about the size of the end of your pinky. That would be about 564 liters of coal or of oil or a ton of coal. It's a very high density energy source. And what's really interesting, sorry this slide doesn't show up the color. There's something wrong with the color for some reason. Must be Microsoft, I would expect it would be the problem. But if we were to produce nuclear power in Australia, the footprint for all the nuclear power needed in Australia would be 150 square kilometers. If you did that just with wind, it would be 33,000 square kilometers. And that's just energy density, and that's the same all over the world. You're just finding that, for example, England couldn't possibly produce all their power with offshore wind because you'd have a belt of windmills 50 miles wide surrounding the whole continent. So high energy power source. So, oh, and this is one of my favorite stats. So a golf ball-sized piece of uranium would power your entire life. So that would be all the power you would need would come from something the size of a golf ball. I'll just skip past that. So let's talk about reactor growth. So this is from the WNA's report that came out this year. It comes at a two-yearly report that comes out showing reactor growth. And unsurprising, China growing. China's the answer to Australia, growing up here with flat to negative growth in Europe and flat growth in America. These are the reference cases. Now on the supply side, what's interesting is it has been broken up into different categories, being current supply, secondary supply, which is this lighter blue bar, and then projects under development and planned, which are these ones in here, and Mulga Rock sits in here. This is the reference case for demand, which is that line there, and this is the upper case. The reference case is current government policies. It includes Japan getting out to 25 gigawatts by 2026. But what this does is this shows if, in a better case where the world says, hey, look, we really need nuclear, we're going to build more plants. This is the upper case from the WNA. And this supply gap is filled up by a category that we call unspecified supply. And so that's all the mines that haven't done a DFS, that have some drilling around it, might have done a PEA or a scoping study. So there's a lot of those out there, and they need high prices to get going, or they need better political climate. But there aren't many that are sitting in the planned and under development category. As I said, there's only 10. And then there's this idled capacity. So the yellow one is basically, well, let's turn those other mines back on. So Mulga Rock's that orangey color. This is the idle capacity. But what it shows is as you move into the 20s, there just isn't enough supply that we can see in the pipeline. And this gap here, our production, we need to think further ahead than next year when you talk about the uranium price and uranium demand, because, say, Mulga Rock, say we go into financial investment decision at the end of next year, it's a 2-year build, we're producing electricity in 2023. So 2023, there's already a supply gap. And then, okay, McArthur River turns back on. Great, supply gap. So there is a supply gap moving forward. And this report, what's really important about this report is this is written by the entire industry. This is the producers, it's the converters, it's the enrichers, and it's the utilities. And it's a consensus report. So they're now all seeing this, and they know that there's a supply gap coming, and they're preparing for it by starting up contract cycle. On the demand side, the growth is mainly coming out. I really apologize for the graphics here, because there is a map of the world here, and I'm pretty sure most of you know what the world looks like. So we've got China over here, 170 proposed plants, and there are 55 plants currently under construction in the world, with 452 operating. So there's a lot of growth. So as I say, the green myth that the uranium industry is dying is complete crock of shit. So uranium price. I want to spend a bit of time on this. I've got 6 minutes left. This is the historic uranium price graph. So what we saw was a massive price spike in 2007 as a result of the flood in McArthur Rivers. So a whole bunch of supply was coming off, and the utilities all, of course, panicked and started spending up to $100. And then it broke into, it went from where contract and spot prices were coincident to where you actually had an arbitrage. You actually had a spot market, and this is the contract, long-term contract market. And you can see that there's always a price gap. And unlike, say, in iron ore or gold, where you can have a spot price above or below benchmark, this one, the spot price is always below the contract price because it's an arbitrator's market. So to say it's manipulated is an understatement. It does react to macroeconomics, but by and large, it reacts to where the contracts are at the moment. And as we saw with Fukushima, which occurred here, and then Kazakhstan coming into the market as far back as 2006 and oversupplying the market, we saw the price drift down. Now, this is what sits in everyone's mind. This is what everyone thinks. So they think nickel spot, they think copper spot, gold spot. This isn't the price that people are paying for uranium. If this were the price people were paying for uranium, there wouldn't be an existing mine in the world. Nobody's making money at these prices, not even the Kazakhs. They thought they were, and then they got McKinsey to come in and go through the books, and they said, oh gosh, actually we're not making much money here. We better stop supply and put the price up. So what are people paying? So what I did was I went through this rather, it's a great website called the Energy Information Agency if you're looking at anything to do with energy. Great stats. So what they do is, because the uranium market's so opaque, they take all of the pricing that's been paid by the US utilities and they break it into bins of 1/8 tons, octiles, let's call it. And then what is the price of each of those? Obviously you can't read that, so I've graphed it for you. So what this is this is basically the price that the American utilities have been paying for uranium since 2003. And what you can see is that that's a $60 price, $50 price here. So the US have been paying the price that we need for our project since 2007. And more to the point is that it doesn't follow the spot price or the contract price. So there's this disconnected market of reality, which is where we're playing and trying to get contracts, versus what the perception is. And this is as an investor, this is your opportunity. So that's our incentive price. So if this were a true spot market, this is where the spot price would be. It would be at the marginal cost of production, the upper cost that people need to pay to keep production going, not down here. So this is the problem with this market. In fact, there's a lot of, I don't even want to talk about it. So I call that the misunderstood arbitrage floor price. I was calling it the manipulated arbitrage floor price, but I got in trouble for that. Lastly, I'll just talk about leading price indicators. So in the uranium space, we've got uranium, we've got conversion, where we convert it prior to enrichment, then we've got enrichment. Those two are more realistic markets, so less speculative. They're based on supply and demand economics. Both of those are now showing increases. So back in 2018, we saw the conversion price start to go up when they announced McArthur River suspension. And then in July 2018, when they announced McArthur River was closing, what we call SWU, or enrichment prices, started going up. These are leading indicators. The other important thing is the inventory management by the Americans. So they burn about 50 million pounds a year, which is here. And what they did was they built up inventories when uranium was cheaper, and now they're running them down. And as we come into the early 20s, their inventories will fall below the levels that they're comfortable with. So they'll start buying. And they'll start writing the contracts next year to be buying in 22 and 23, which is when our company comes into production. Now, lastly, I'll just talk about this slide. This is the consensus for uranium based on about a dozen different analysts who follow the uranium space. And what I've got here is the median spot price, which is the blue box. And then you remember when I talked about the arbitrage between contract and spot, that's what this, I don't know what color that is. Jerry, what color is that? Is that orange? Same color as my pants.
All these colors are perfect, Mike.
Huh?
All these colors are perfect. I don't know what you're complaining about.
Yeah, I'm
You need to get your
colorblind.
eyes checked.
So, yes, I should. So that is the price forecast going forward. That's our incentive price, and if we're in production in 23, we're in the market. That's when we expect to be in production. So I actually think these are a little bit pessimistic, but they are analysts. So what this tells you is that the price, Sorry, the uranium market is moving into a period of undersupply where the price will react as the utilities start coming into the market, and it's basically Vimy coming into the sweet spot for it. That's the end of my time. I can talk about the project at the booth. We've got copies of the presentation, but I'll leave it at that because I really wanted to cover off uranium and uranium price mythology. So thank you very much.